morning, everybody. Thank you so much for attending this event held by the Citizens for Responsible Government. You will see that this is a diverse and vital and active coalition that has come together to defeat the Constitutional Convention in Rhode Island. The obvious question is, why would you want to defeat the Constitutional Convention? On the surface, it seems that this would be a welcome thing for citizens to participate, but clearly now it's not. The majority in other states, when they have a constitutional convention, have used this as a hammer and a wedge against minority rights, civil rights in general, labor rights, and the rights of every citizen. Rhode Island cannot go down this road. So we urge you and thank you for attending this event. We have a great list of speakers, which I would love to introduce to you.
No problem.
If you don't mind, then we'll just get right to that. I can find my list.
Michael, can you tell us where you're from, please?
Yes, my name is Michael Rajo. I'm the business agent of IATSE Local 23. First, I would like to introduce Pablo Rodriguez. He is president and CEO of Women's Care, former medical director of Planned Parenthood. His history and record for looking out for some of the most vulnerable people in Rhode Island speaks for itself. His stance against this should be one that everyone takes note. So with that, I welcome Pablo.
Thank you very much. Good morning. It is my honor really to be joined at this podium and in this event and in this coalition with a large group of advocates who have dedicated their lives to justice and the protection of civil rights. Before I begin my arguments against holding a constitutional convention, I want to recognize and acknowledge that we have a difference of opinion with other groups of individuals and organizations that also want the best for our state. In no way should our opposition to the convention be interpreted as opposition to many of the issues we share, such as promotion of good government and ethics. We just believe that the remedy they propose could have serious unintended consequences for future generations. The road to hell is paved by good intentions. Every 10 years we have the ability to call for the opening of the rule book we call our Constitution in order to improve on such document and make any course corrections that we as states see fit. In a perfect world where the rights of racial, ethnic, sexual, immigrants, and other minorities wouldn't be at stake, such course correction may be in order. But we are far from living in such a perfect world, and previous experience here and in other states have demonstrated that such a process opens the door to well-funded special interests whose purposes are less altruistic than what the framers originally envisioned. Opening of this rulebook can make many of the gains we have obtained through the legislative process disappear and set the stage for further restrictions in the future. For the last 30 years, I have seen efforts to restrict sexual and reproductive rights, immigrant rights, and the rights of racial, language, and ethnic minorities. And the thought of opening the rule book to a small group of individuals elected by a small minority of the state with no accountability for their actions once they are finished, it is just unthinkable. We are inarguably living in one of the most polarizing moments in these 30 years I've been here. And the risks of this constitutional exercise are just too high. The convention is not going to be limited to the issues they could address, and while important issues such as good government efforts will certainly be covered, issues such as English-only laws and reversing the gains of immigrant students and families will most likely be dealt with, and most likely not in a positive way. Sexual and reproductive rights, which are constantly being fought over in the legislature, could be seriously curtailed, as it wasn't the case in the last Constitutional Convention. And as someone who was part of that battle, I can tell you it was a costly and dangerous exercise then. It is scarier today. We can't afford to lose the gains we have made. As I said in my opening remarks, everyone in this coalition and all the groups they represent are for good government reform. Unfortunately, in 1986, the last time we held the convention, we had a number of these reforms come out to the voters, such as term limits for state officers, increasing legislative pay, and reforming the judicial process, but many were rejected because they were watered down. In subsequent years, we've seen the state legislature address these issues and have them approved by the voters through the regular amendment process. Finally, it is important to recognize the increasing role of money in all political campaigns. And this, in essence, is the most important political campaign we run every 10 years. The powerful, those who are connected and who stand to gain the process by funding delegates and initiatives that run counter to this lively experiment we call Rhode Island, are chomping at the bit to have their views permanently enshrined in a document that will rule our life and the lives of our children and their children's children for years to come. The real remedy against bad government is to elect good people to government and to throw them out if they do not follow the will of the people. Changing the rule book without changing the people is a risk we as a coalition of advocates for justice are unwilling to take, and we hope you join us in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. Next on the program is Hillary Davis. She's the Policy Associate for the ACLU. The ACLU of Rhode Island has been working for the cause of our rights, each right of each individual, the rights of us to act collectively, individually, and protect each other. Their value cannot be underestimated, and their participation in this coalition should be noted. Hillary?
Thank you very much. Dr. Rodriguez spoke very eloquently about a lot of our concerns in relationship to a constitutional convention, and I just want to expound on them a little bit. Constitutional Convention is a General Assembly on steroids, exempt from none of the political influences that plague the legislature, tasked only with evaluating and redefining our basic constitutional rights, and in the end, accountable to no one. It's not speculation, but it's a certainty that a constitutional convention will leave civil rights and civil liberties open to debate and ultimately dissolution. Despite the best intentions of many of those who call for a constitutional convention, and the ACLU certainly shares many of their frustrations with the General Assembly, our own experiences in Rhode Island and the experiences of ballot initiatives nationwide demonstrate very starkly the dangers of a constitutional convention, and those dangers should not be ignored or minimized. Despite the purported focus of the 1986 Constitutional Convention being that of good government, some of the most significant measures to come from that convention focused on abortion rights, restricting the voting rights of felons, restricting the right to bail, and more. And time has shown that what happened in 1986 is not an aberration. Once a convention meets, there are no limits on the issues that it can address, and conventions can serve as catalysts for socially divisive amendments that threaten our most basic civil rights. Looking at ballot initiatives across the country, we can get an example of what it is that we can expect to see. And since 1986, there have been at least 18 anti-abortion initiatives put up for voter consideration, 4 initiatives to ban affirmative action, 5 initiatives to require English as the official language, 5 initiatives to ban equal rights for gays and lesbians, 9 various anti-immigrant measures, 13 initiatives to ban same-sex marriage, and most recently 11 initiatives aimed at restricting state participation in Obamacare or restricting the ability to create a state health exchange. That is what we can expect to see in Rhode Island and more. Constitutions are supposed to protect certain fundamental rights from the will of the majority, but a constitutional convention allows a simple majority to take away those rights. That the courts can eventually nullify some provisions of the Rhode Island Constitution that we enact that may conflict with the U.S. Constitution is no protection anymore for those individuals whose rights will be suspended or obliterated by a constitutional convention. Courts move very slowly. They take years to come to a conclusion on these matters, and that a court may one day overturn a decision made by the voters is going to provide very little relief to the individuals whose rights are restricted or denied in the meantime. That's what we've seen with same-sex marriage, couples whose rights have been suspended in the years that it has taken courts to come to these decisions, and of course the women who are living in states enforcing unconstitutional restrictions on reproductive freedom, or whose courts have chipped away at the Constitution. Since 1986, the courts have become much less protective of the rights that are so often the subject of ballot initiatives and constitutional conventions, including abortion and, as we saw with the U.S. Supreme Court just last week, affirmative action. Courts can no longer be counted on to declare unconstitutional the things they should. Constitutional amendments deserve very serious consideration, including robust debate and careful drafting, a process that cannot occur in a constitutional convention. Our Constitution is not a document that should be so subject to wholesale revision, and the ACLU opposes a constitutional convention. Thank you.
Thank you, Hillary. The next speaker is a person who has worked tirelessly for the rights of working people, poverty, minorities in the state of Rhode Island. His record is long and storied, and I consider personally him a mentor. With that, I'd like to introduce George Nee, President of the Rhode Island AFL-CIO.
Thank you, Mike. What a cool place to have a press conference, huh? This place is great. We haven't been here before. Spent some time. Remember, we were here two months before the rest of the country caught up to declare their independence, so kind of historic. On behalf of the Rhode Island AFL-CIO, we are proud members and partners of the Citizens for Responsible Government Coalition that is here today. We have discussed this issue at our executive board level. We are adamantly opposed to having a constitutional convention. This is not a new position. We've been opposed to every constitutional convention that has been held. We were involved in trying to stop the ones in 96 and 2006 or 2004, and were successful. We really believe that the landscape has changed dramatically since our last constitutional convention, which was in 1986. There have been some very, very alarming, disturbing, and terrible Supreme Court decisions, one just recently in the McCutcheon decision, and of course we're all aware of Citizens United. When I say the landscape has changed, we now have a situation where wealthy individuals with certain specific agendas and corporate agendas can spend unlimited money outside, coming in from the outside, to influence our Constitution with little or no restrictions. And we do not think that is the proper way for a democracy to operate. We have procedures in our Constitution to amend our Constitution, and they have been utilized on many, many different occasions, but they go through a much more deliberate and serious process than a constitutional convention allows for. It's been mentioned, we would have 75 people elected by rep districts if a constitutional convention was called for, and they are essentially unaccountable. They're not accountable after their actions to the voters, the way that our current reps and senators are. So it's something that can provide, I think, no value to the citizens of this state, as frustrating and inefficient sometimes, and disturbing, and whatever other words the people who have lobbied at the General Assembly care to use on any given day. It is a system that has the proper checks and balances to ensure the safeguards of people's freedom, liberty, and rights. And so for those reasons, we will adamantly oppose the effort to have a constitutional convention, and we again are proud to be part of this very prestigious coalition. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Our next speaker is Paula Hodges. She is Rhode Island Public Policy and Government Relations Director for Planned Parenthood of Rhode Island and Southern New England. She has been a tireless fighter for the rights of women and minority in the state of Rhode Island. Her opposition to this should show the depth and the expanse of this coalition. Paula?
Thank you very much, Mike. Planned Parenthood of Southern New England is a proud coalition partner with Citizens for Responsible Government for a number of reasons, some of which are probably obvious coming out of the 1986 Constitutional Convention that Rhode Island held, which ended up leading to two constitutional amendments that restricted abortion. Most people may remember Amendment 14, which was an amendment that was put at the very end of the statewide ballot in 1986 by design. That amendment was put at the bottom with the hopes that there would be voter drop-off. That amendment spoke to personhood and defining life beginning at conception, and would have flown in the face of Roe v. Wade, and was an attempt to roll back women's reproductive rights. Ultimately, that amendment failed 2-1 at the ballot box, but we shouldn't be quick to forget the process that was in place that allowed that ballot question to go to the voters. It was a very divisive political debate at the 1986 Constitutional Convention, which was decided late at night, probably late in the night, similar to our current state legislature, which decides a lot of socially divisive issues during the budget debate and after the budget debate. And it was decided as a very slim majority, a simple majority, simply 52 votes out of 100, sent that personhood amendment to the ballot. So for anybody who believes the Constitutional Convention will operate any differently or more efficiently or in a more transparent way than our current legislature, we should remember 1986. And when it comes to women's reproductive health and reproductive justice, we're gravely concerned how a Constitutional Convention will not represent the majority of voters who believe these decisions should be left to a woman in consultation with her family, her faith, and her physician. We also believe that women will likely not be equally represented at a Constitutional Convention. In 1986, only 20 of the 100 delegates were women. That's a gross misrepresentation of the number of women in the state of Rhode Island, and we're very concerned that any subsequent Constitutional Convention will likely be very heavily influenced by the current powers that be in the legislature and won't represent women's best interest. Like Hillary said, there have been 18 amendments sent to state ballots over the last 20, 30 years since the last Constitutional Convention, and we are gravely concerned that, once again, abortion rights will be front and center at a 2016 Constitutional Convention. For all of these reasons, Planned Parenthood of Southern New England opposes a Constitutional Convention and looks forward to educating voters this fall. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paula. Our next speaker is a family friend and somebody who has worked for the African American community in Rhode Island, indeed the African American community of the United States, more than 40 years. A civil rights icon of Rhode Island and a treasure, and an honor to call him friend. I'd like to introduce Michael Rajo.
Deeply honored to be a part of this coalition. And before I get into my comments, I'm also deeply shocked every time I see George Nee, because when I first met George, all he had was two blue jeans and a couple of blue kind of work shirts, just coming off his work with Cesar Chavez. I had just come back a few years earlier from the work in the Black Belt counties of Alabama and Mississippi, doing voter registration stuff. And so that's how we met. And here we are telescoping 40 plus years later with the same passion for supporting issues and things that concern our people. So I'm really proud to be here, not just with you, George, but with the rest of the coalition, Pablo and everybody, Mike, to be supportive of not supporting the call of the Constitutional Convention. A Constitutional Convention would determine the future of a state that is undergoing significant demographic change. By the year 2024, that's 10 years from now, Rhode Island's population will be nearing a majority-minority state, if not being there at that point, that will incorporate new energy and cultural inclusion into the fabric of our beautiful state. This is a wonderful development for those that appreciate this value. However, this is quite troubling to the reactionary crowd, and we know who they are. We can talk about the Tea Party, And as George knows, I love the Tea Party, but it's a different Tea Party. I love the Tea Party that dumped the tea in the Bay, Boston, that protested, taxation without representation. The second Tea Party is a whole different aggressive group that I'm concerned about as it relates to this potential of having a call of this convention. Knowing of this reality, it will energize and encourage aggressive groups opposed to protecting the rights of people of color and yearn for the return of yesteryear. Given that historically has been less than 18% of the voting population that participates in the delegate selection, it opens the door wide open to special interest groups that are anti-progressive on issues related to social and economic change and justice. In addition, 2 other amendments approved by the 1986 Convention and the voters dealing with drug crimes and voting rights had a significant adverse impact on racial minorities. Across the country, other social issues like attacks on affirmative actions, women's rights, gay rights, the rights of immigrants, etc., also routinely become fodder for expensive statewide campaigns mounted by special interests to garner success, placing this on the ballot outside the regular legislative process. There is no limit on the amount of money that outside special interests can now spend to persuade delegates to support past constitutional amendments on ideological-driven social issues, as we have seen this take place regularly in other states. We have an opportunity to protect the state of Rhode Island as a symbol of tolerance that is reflected in our history and progressive legislation that adapts to the rapidly changing demographic times. For those of you who can recall, you might be a little too young, but Alvin Toffler, the great futurist, he talked about, one of our big challenges here in America and here in Rhode Island is adapting to the rapidly changing times. And clearly, the demographic changes are incredible in terms of what's happening here. And unless we're able to adapt to those changes, legislatively, socially, economically, we are going to be in a progressive position going forward as we try to build a stronger state for all of us. It also relates to Bob Dylan's song. I don't know how many of you remember Bob Dylan, but he talked about these times they were changing. And some of you young folks, you ought to pick up on Bob Dylan sometime and get a sense of his understanding of the future. In these rapidly changing times, locally, nationally, and internationally, Rhode Island's most precious resource is our people. And we're headed to become one of the most diverse states in the nation. The deep concern that I have is the distinct possibility that the reactionaries to this demographic change will also be driven by racism, anti-Semitism, become very homophobic, immigration resistant to women's issues, and all of this manifesting into progressive or regressive legislation. For the good of our state and its people, along with my colleagues here, I would strongly oppose the calling of the Rhode Island Constitutional Convention. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Our next speaker is somebody who actually reminds us that the arc of history bends towards justice. Jennifer Stevens is the current Secretary and Office Manager for Rhode Island Pride. Rhode Island Pride is one of the most significant organizations to come to Rhode Island. It has changed the lives of more Rhode Islanders in the last couple of years than almost any organization up here. Their commitment to the civil rights of the individual to love who they choose to love and be who they choose to be is vital and cannot be underestimated. Their participation in this coalition is an honor to us and an honor to our state. So with that, Jennifer Stevens.
Thank you, Mike. I just have a few comments to add to what's already been said today by the other panelists here. But it's been 1 year since we won equal marriage rights through our state legislature, and we remember our long struggle and recognize the same groups and individuals who opposed gay rights and funded our opposition will wish to play a role in a constitutional convention. Every Rhode Islander should be concerned about attempts by these same organizations to leverage a constitutional convention in order to roll back or stifle LGBTQ and other minority rights. A constitutional convention cannot provide a better alternative to our current state legislature's ability to ensure LGBTQ rights. We are gravely concerned that those who would be elected in a small turnout special election will not reflect the wishes or diversity of our LGBTQ community. And therefore, Rhode Island Pride stands in solidarity with the coalition. Thank you.